knowledge is no longer power. Knowledge is only power potential. It's what we do with it.
Yeah.
It's in the application of it.
Maybe that's why I struggle so much with connection, because it means showing up authentically as I am, which is so tied to my self-worth, which is what I've always struggled with.
The reason why we are so dissatisfied as a society, why we are so frustrated and all of the things that we're going through, is because we no longer live in discomfort.
How it's far more important to really focus on being compassionate, true to yourself, true to your values, and to have integrity.
If you're consuming junk all the time, if all you're eating is junk food, you're going to end up with a junk mindset. You're going to end up with a junk heart set, right?
Hi, and welcome to the Living Richly podcast. So glad that you are here joining us on this episode. I feel like it's been forever since the four of us have done an episode together. It's, I think, at least a month since the last one came out. And I'm really excited about today's topic. We're going to talk about some of the sources of information, whether it's books, podcasts, all of the different stuff that we focus on, that we use to kind of keep ourselves motivated and encouraged and inspired. And these are some of my favorite, when I'm listening to other podcasts, probably some of my favorite ones. You and I have listened to a number where we're diving in and just want to hear, what are other people reading? What are other people listening to? And so we're going to try to provide for you, the listener, some of the things that we really lean into, our favorite books, our favorite podcasts. But maybe let's just start with a simple question. And Eric, I'm going to get you to respond first, and then we can just all jump in. But why does this even matter? Why is it important for people to be looking and continually looking for new sources of information, finding out about good books, learning from others? Why does that even matter for most people?
Well, I think regardless of the medium, whether it's watching videos online or reading blogs or books or listening to audiobooks, there's so many different ways now that one can actually consume great information. Is you really are what you eat, right? We talk about that in the world of health. Yeah. If you're consuming junk all the time, if all you're eating is junk food, you're going to end up with a junk mindset. You're going to end up with a junk heart set, right? If you want to fuel your transformation journey, then we've got to be taking in positive sources of information that don't just, and by positive, I mean positive in terms of it's uplifting, but it's designed to actually rattle our cage and expand our mindset. I fundamentally believe that people change first at the mindset level. Because if you don't change there, any change you make in your life is typically temporary behavior modification that you're not going to be able to sustain. So how are you going to change your mindset? You got to expose yourself to new ways of thinking, new philosophies, new worldviews, new information that's different than what you've currently lived with.
Yeah. And I think too, it helps. Well, we know it helps with like brain function, memory, fulfillment. Like there's all these physical benefits from growth, right? And whether, we're talking about more personal growth today, but whether you're learning a new skill, whether you're learning how to lay tile in the bathroom or whatever that looks like, just that continuous, working of your mind has actual health, physical benefits.
Yeah, they've talked about how even it used to be thought that for many decades that the brain stopped growing after the age of 25. And now with neuroplasticity, we know that that's not the case. But if the mind is not exercised and you don't exercise it, there's nothing wrong, folks, with like entertainment and sitting down watching a good movie or binging a great series, but it's typically not going to fuel your brain. That type of learning when you're, again, I loved how you brought in just even a skill. It doesn't even have to be a new concept, but learning something new keeps the brain cells sharp and keeps them evolving. And the studies have shown now that really right into your 90s, you can be continuing to evolve your brain synapses.
And I think especially in this day and age, there's so many different types of sources of inspiration. Like some people like to read, some people don't, some people like to listen. And so it's a nice way to really be able to expand what it is that we're consuming. I'm a huge believer in what you focus on, you find; what you focus on, you become. And we get tons of messages, actually in our Living Richly Facebook group, which if you're not part of that, make sure that you join because there's a lot of great stuff in there. But we get questions all the time, and there's really great dialogue in there around what are the things that we listen to, what fills our cup, because there is so much out there. It can be, it's a very saturated market. So,
totally.
It really is interesting that, I'm a big believer that not only do we need to be continually learning, like basically reading and being inspired by stuff, but also challenged. I love reading material that maybe is a little bit off from what I believe, because it helps me to expand why and what I believe. My mom was famous for this. My mom was a big reader, and she would always want us as kids reading. But one of the things she would often, her and I would do, is engage in is taking different opinions on, let's say there's a news story, and one of us would say, wow, this is what I think about that. And the other one would take a contrary viewpoint, not because we were usually aligned with what we believe, but it was an opportunity to say, if I'm going to really believe something, I better be able to defend it from and explain it from the opposite viewpoint.
I think your mom was brilliant.
That.
She took the bickering of her children and turned it into focused learning.
Made it into an art.
I love it.
And I also love what you said a few minutes ago about the notion of there's nothing wrong with binging a Netflix show. Totally. I think the mistake some make, and I'll be first to say this. Listen, I love reading, whether it's a Stephen King or whoever it might be. I'm reading a series right now of books that Wendy got me for my birthday, and I'm
It's the Hardy Boys.
The Hardy
series.
Boys series. No, it's not. It's all
Nancy Drew.
But this series, it's just
nobody knows what that is.
It's just total fiction, and there's nothing in it that is inspiring growth or challenging. But it's okay to take a break from. We don't need to be doing this 24/7.
No, absolutely not.
But we need to have some kind of a discipline, a practice of inspiration, and I think that's so important.
Totally. And one of the things I really appreciate about you, Kate, is we've talked about this a number of times, and I think it's important to mention on the show. I think when this subject matter comes up, like most of the time you'll see it, the best books of this year, or the must-read books of 2024, or people on their podcasts or on their shows. Well, it's often book related. And I get that that's a very popular, it's been for centuries, a way of consuming information, but that's really shifted. And for you, it's very different.
Well, because I struggle to read. So I think it's like, that's why I love her doing this show, because I think it's not about, there's always this association, you're not growing if you're not reading. And it's got nothing to do with reading. It's just like, are you growing?
Are you learning?
Right? Are you learning? Do you have a desire to grow? And then find whatever format brings you joy. So I love when you talk, Rob, and you're like, when you talk about reading, it's joy. And I know like the three of you are avid readers. And so, but that's a joyful experience for you. You're like, this is awesome. I'm going to get into a good book. I get to a book and I'm like, I don't enjoy it. And I struggled in university. Like, it's not where I learned.
There's a lot of people like that.
And so find what works for you and what excites you. So like I watch a great TED Talk, or I can watch a movie, or I do a lot of audiobooks. I watch a shit ton of documentaries.
So many documentaries.
It's find what works for you. But I think what it is the appetite for growth. That's the key. 100%. It's not how you consume.
We have said so many times on the show that there is no easy button. There is no one size fits all. And actually, I'm a little allergic to that in the marketplace today, where people, they get on a path. I was talking to one client of mine. I referred to him a couple shows ago, young client of mine who came to me a few months ago, and he was in a really bad place personally, professionally, and really lost is the way he described it. And so I started walking him through the model that's emerged with Living Richly, and he's been able to identify his values and figure out what works for him. But it's not a cookie cutter. He's adapted it. He's doing different things as well. But we talked about how often we get on a path, something that's really meaningful to us. Let's use CrossFit as an example, because it probably shows up in the World of CrossFit more than anywhere else, right? Where you get into that feel, you get into that. I remember when I started training years ago, I wanted to win everybody over. And it got to the point where the people, like, if you talk to me about that one more time, we get evangelical or dogmatic about it because it works for me. We get passionate and we want to share the message. But what we fail to understand is what works for one may not work for another. So it's learn, to your point, nurture that appetite and then find what works for you. And that bits and pieces of people's strategy may work for you, but usually copy and paste as well.
Well, and way back, episode like 4 or 5 or 6, somewhere.
Oh my God!
Way back when we did.
You know what episode we're at today?
Where we had less gray.
It's not episode 4.
No, we had less gray in our beards. Eric.
He's not. I'm beating him, but he's not.
Episode 68 plus 1.
Episode 68 plus 1.
Because we're children.
And exactly right. But I remember making, and it was kind of I said it it was brilliant. And I didn't even realize it was brilliant until I said it. It was on the spot. And that was this notion of your rituals are designed to serve you.
Yes.
Not you serving your rituals.
Totally.
And so anything, whether it's, I have to read to grow. No, now you are serving a ritual rather than the ritual serving you. And so I think 100%. It's so true in this case of inspiration.
Yeah. I would add I think another myth, if, debunking the only readers are growing. No. Another one is that I have to keep consuming tons of content.
Yeah.
I think in the world of self-help, personal growth, professional growth, there's so much available that people can begin to binge this stuff and just go from one book to the next, one podcast to the next, one video to the next. I mean, another way to take in information now is even you can watch short form content online and get like 1-minute bits of information and inspiration that can be quite meaningful. But it's not about the volume, right? And I think we talked about this on our episode on reflection. It's not about the volume of information we're taking in. Sometimes the best thing you could do is maybe stop whatever source of intake that really works through, stop and go back to the last source, the last couple of sources, and spend some time with it, sit with it for a while.
It's funny. I mean, and maybe you can talk about this. We did this. We have a number of things that we kind of commit to doing every day, some tasks, and we work well in that environment. But we shifted one of them, and that was around the reading, and maybe talk a bit about that because I think it fits right in.
Yeah. We used to embody the practice of reading 10 pages every day of a personal development or a book that was going to help grow us. And both of us found, and we did that for quite a while, both of us found it became more of a box to check, saying, yep, okay, it's done, versus what did we actually absorb from it? What are we taking from it? And I know for myself, sometimes I'd be thinking like, okay, I've got to get the clothes out of the washing machine before the mildew sits in.
I just read the same paragraph 13 times and I'm not reading it.
And which sucks because I have to get 10 pages in.
I have to get 10 pages.
This is going to take me forever.
Right. And so it became more of a chore versus something that we were enjoying. And so we shifted it from, instead of 10 pages, 20 minutes.
Right.
So, and the book I'm reading right now, I love to just linger and just go over the same paragraph and the same page.
No pressure.
Might be 2 pages in 20 minutes, right? If depending on what it is, because you might just sit and go, I really just need to sit and contemplate that paragraph I just read. And it's so much more freeing to be able to do that.
Well,
it goes right to that myth.
It's more impactful because reflection is the glue that makes that new information stick. When you just keep consuming, it's like overeating. It's unhealthy. Right?
Well, it's our culture of quick fixes, right? Like it's, I'm going to read this and I'm going to master this and I'm going to go right over here. Oh no, I can do it that way. Okay. And then you're just like, you're constantly looking for like, how do I fix it, right? And so you're trying one thing after the other without actually, to your point, taking time to like digest or read. Absorb. Exactly.
Yeah. It's the 52 books and 50 in a book a week every year, whatever it is, 52 books in a year. And it's like, but how much of that have you actually taken in?
Exactly.
We're familiar with the phrase "knowledge is power." It's often been thrown around, and a lot of folks don't know this, but it was actually coined by Sir Francis Bacon in the late 18th century. He coined it in Latin. Bacon.
I love bacon.
Wait, what are we talking about? Bacon.
We're talking about bacon.
Nothing else matters now.
Knowledge is bacon.
Knowledge is bacon.
Bacon. I can taste bacon right now.
I know,
we can all taste it. Yeah.
Wait, episode 68.1. Okay, so Sir Francis Bacon coined it in Latin, and which when they translate in English, we get the phrase "knowledge is power." Well, back in his day, only the wealthy had access to education, knowledge, books, reading. So that phrase was accurate. Knowledge was power, right? Because the average person didn't have access to
no printing press,
no internet, none of it, right? Today, we have knowledge all around us. I mean, it's actually a knowledge overload. So knowledge is no longer power. Knowledge is only power potential. It's what we do with it.
Yeah.
It's in the application of it. And that's why I'm a big fan of sometimes slow down the pace and focus on what you're doing. I was notorious for years, and I still find myself doing this sometimes, that I want to conquer the book. I want to finish the book. And so I get to the end of the chapter and maybe there's some reflection questions. And I'm like, yeah, I'll come back to those. Skip on to the next chapter. And I'm like, yet that's probably the most important part
Yeah, exactly.
Of the book. So slowing down whatever source of information, whether it's books, videos, slow it down. Consider slowing it down. It's not the volume, it's the amount of reflection and how it actually sticks to you. Right?
All right. So here's what I'd like us to do as we go through this with the inspiration.
Chief taking over,
Really?
right?
Wow,
settle down.
That's easy. Steve, are you there? All right, I need some help.
Yeah, he's eating bacon.
There's going to be some serious editing in this episode.
Yeah, we're editing you out.
What I'd like us to do is we'll kind of go around, and Kate, maybe I'll start with you on this, but let's share one piece of inspiration, source of inspiration, might be a book, podcast, whatever.
Yeah.
And let's just take some time. We'll take 2 or 3 minutes, share some of your concepts from it. The rest of us can jump in and add our thoughts to what we're hearing from each, or maybe ask some follow-up questions, but let's just kind of unpack and take our time rather than try to give 30 things. Maybe we only get to 1 or 2 each, but let's take some time with that. So maybe why don't we start with you? What's one of the sources of inspiration?
God, you're all staring at me.
Serious.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Turn around. Bring it.
This was hard for me because there's lots.
Right.
So, but I went with Brene Brown's TED Talk, The Power of Vulnerability.
Oh my God.
So it's one of the first TED Talks that really impacted me. And I was so curious. So I'm preparing for the show. I'm like, I'm going to go back and just find out, I wonder when that came out. Because I had no idea.
It's been a while now.
14 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, right? So I was like, okay. So now I rewatched it because I'm like, I want to rewatch it with my lens today and the growth that I've done. So it was interesting watching it back. But Brene Brown at that time was a researcher. She was not a speaker. She was not a public figure. That's what catapulted her.
Okay.
And so that TED Talk has over 60 million views. It's one of the most viewed of all time. And what I found so interesting is I related to Brene Brown instantly. I think so many people did. So she's a researcher, really hardcore researcher at this point. And what was so great about it is she came off so smart, funny, giving you really cool information in a way that didn't feel like data and research, right? So for me, I remember just being like, oh, she's disarming with her humor. She's brilliant with her research. She's interviewed over 12,000 people and she's a qualitative researcher. So it's hearing people's stories.
Wow.
And she's a natural storyteller. So the way she presented the data out in that was really interesting. But the whole premise is around obviously vulnerability because it's called The Power of Vulnerability, but it's all really around connection. And what I loved about it is she talks about what her research showed, right, is that you can't have true human connection without vulnerability. And so we're all hardwired for connection unless you're you don't have an ability to empathy. And that's a very small portion of the population, but we're all hardwired for it. Right. We're all hardwired for it. But you can't have true connection unless you're vulnerable. So what she studied was, okay, vulnerability, really what does that look like at its core? And what she found is that people who were able to be vulnerable had a strong sense of self-worth. So then she got really interested in her research, dove more into, I want to learn from those people who have a strong sense of self-worth and where does that come from? Meanwhile, she's very uncomfortable with vulnerability herself. So it
even comes through.
Oh my God, there's so much humor.
Such a great talk.
It's so well done. But what she found is the people had 3, and I want to make sure I get them. So they have 3 things in common. So someone who identifies as having strong self-worth, they have courage. So courage to be not perfect, courage to show up exactly how they are. And she calls these people wholehearted. So
love that.
Living a wholehearted life.
Yeah.
So showing up in a courageous way as they are. Compassion. So they start with compassion for self. Then they can have compassion for others. So that whole, you put your oxygen mask on first and give it. So that's how they flow.
Yeah.
Connection, right? So true connection for them is not hard. They crave true connection. And that's because they can show up authentically, exactly how they are. So those 3, and then when they're vulnerable, they don't feel either way about it. It's not like something it's not like this, I feel icky about it or I feel good about it. They just feel like it's something they need to do.
It's natural.
It's a natural flow to have that true connection.
I love that. You know, it's interesting. I have seen the TED Talk.
Yeah.
It's been years, and I'm like, I need to go back and watch that again. I can't remember the last time I've seen it, but certainly
I have not seen it.
It's been at least 5 years. But what really resonated there was that notion of you can't truly have connection without the vulnerability. And right away, I thought about, you know, just this morning, Wendy and I were having our coffee and tea in bed. We were just kind of, as we were getting up, we were having our coffee and tea and having a conversation, and we were talking about some of the episodes we're going to be recording today. One of the episodes we're recording is one on masculinity and, you know, doing a series, and that came out just a few weeks ago. But we were, as we were preparing for the episode, and she was asking me, so well, how do you feel about it? And I was sharing some things from my childhood and stuff. And it was just a wonderfully vulnerable moment to the point that as she left for work, and as she's probably gone from the house 10 minutes, and I'm texting her saying, hey, I already miss you. And then I said, I love that you are my safe space. And I see that because I've never felt like I've had a connection like the one I have with Wendy.
Right.
And it's because of that vulnerability. It wasn't like, do I share this? Do I don't share this? Yeah. It was natural. It was just such an easy conversation to talk about some of my experiences with masculinity as a teen and as a young person because of the nature of that. So I love that about that.
I love that. Yeah. We always talk about it as our foundation. It's like the foundation is solid no matter what happens. So but that connection for me, when I watched it 14 years ago, I remember because Brene Brown, like as she goes through it, she starts talking about her own experience. So as the research evolves, she's like, I am not comfortable.
I don't like where this is going.
And she talks about how she seeks out a therapist. And so she seeks out a therapist for therapists, right? Because that's a thing.
Right. Yeah.
And so she goes into her therapist to say, listen, I need to unpack this thing about vulnerability. She goes in and she's like, but I don't want to talk about my childhood. I don't want to talk about my parents. I don't want to talk about anything.
Can we do this without being vulnerable?
Yeah. I want help, but I don't want to talk about anything.
So why I love it so much is she made it like almost gave me permission to be like, oh, maybe that's why I struggle so much with connection, because it means showing up authentically as I am, which is so tied to my self-worth, which is what I've always struggled with. And all of a sudden I was like, and she struggles with it. And so it gave me permission to be like, fuck, right? And so it was one of those, and it was just presented in such a way that was so easy. Like I encourage everyone to go watch it if you haven't seen it, or rewatch it if you've seen it, because I watched it with a different lens this time. It was absolutely fascinating. One of my top picks.
It's truly a superpower. I'm convinced. Vulnerability.
Oh, it's
and I remember watching the TED Talk and being deeply impacted by it. Vulnerability is kind of, and authenticity has been a value of mine for a very long time, even when I was much younger. And my experience has been that when we've talked this on the show, when you go first, when you're willing to just show up authentically, you give people permission to do the same, and you create that safe space for other people, right? For me, it's just fascinating to hear you kind of draw it out again, because I keep forgetting. I've been reminded this a few times over the years, but courage, connection, compassion are 3 of my 4 core values. Add curiosity, and that can round out the set. But those are it's like I forget, because I didn't get them from her. I didn't get them from reading her book. But it just is very affirming to hear that articulated.
So we're gonna put we'll certainly put the link to the TED Talk in the show notes.
That'd be great.
But of course, you can just go to TED.com. I think it is, and just Google
Brene Brown.
Yeah, just Google her name. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
it'll come up. For me, and I think we all probably will say this, is that it was really, how do you pick one, right? I mean,
it's like,
what's my top 50? And try to come to that. And I narrowed it down. I don't know if it's necessarily, it's the one that was resonating the most to bring up for today.
Yeah.
Whether it's my number one, or it was certainly, I was saying a couple of years ago, it was the number one book of inspiration for me a couple of years ago when I first read it. And it's actually, we even have it out on our bookshelf. It's one of the books that's hanging there. It's The Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter. He's come out with a new book since that, Scarcity. Good, but nowhere near. It was still some good stuff. But Comfort Crisis, for me, maybe it just hit at the right time. But the whole premise of the book is the reason why we are so dissatisfied as a society, why we are so frustrated and all of the things that we're going through, is because we no longer longer live in discomfort, that we are such a comfort society, that everything around us, right? So in our genetic, in our DNA is this, our ancestors, they didn't know if they were going to eat that night. They had to go hunt to feed. They didn't know if they were going to, where they were going to sleep. They didn't know what their trials they're going to face.
They didn't know what they were going to eat or what was going to eat them.
Or what was going to eat them, right? Like there was, and so there was this constant struggle, this constant battle just to find comfort. And so you spent your day seeking out comfort. Today, we don't need to do that.
Right.
No.
It's hot, we turn on the air conditioning. It's cold, we turn on the heat, right?
Yeah.
You're tired, you get in your comfy bed, whatever it is. And the premise of the book is, if you are truly going to live full lives, you need to now seek out ways to put yourself in discomfort so that you can come back to appreciating comfort.
Right.
And I've implemented it in some really simple, funny ways. Well, I don't know if it's funny, but just silly ways, I guess. For example, one of the things when we work out at the gym, on the treadmills, one of the things I purposely do, and it was from reading the book, I make sure the fan's turned off on the treadmill. I don't want that extra comfort. I want to be in discomfort when it comes to, what are you doing?
Try to turn off your screen. I try to make you uncomfortable.
When I turn off my own screen.
All you see is this.
It's coming into this camera. Eric's a trial. We record, as you know, lots of episodes in a day, and it's near the end of the day, and you can tell. But it's putting yourself in those places of discomfort. And two of the things that he were challenges in the book for me. The first one, I brought it up on other episodes before, and that was he has a chapter on it's called "Think About Your Death 3 Times a Day." And that the challenge, and when I share that with people, I remember the first time I shared it with you, and you're like,
just thinking of
nope. No thanks. Don't want to think about that. And his whole premise, and he's a researcher, is what he is. He's a journalist, is his background. And he travels to the country of Bhutan, where that's considered the happiest people, the least stressed people in the world. And they have monuments to death all over their town. When you drive, he describes driving through this town and all of these monuments. But this notion of you can't truly appreciate living in the moment until you really come to terms with the fact that it could be your last moment. That we don't know,
agree.
right? One of us could just not wake up tomorrow morning.
Yep.
And we go, I don't think like that. That's what keeps you saying, but that means I'm going to really fucking appreciate and experience the fullness of today because I don't know. I just don't.
So, what's so interesting is one of Brene Brown's takeaway from vulnerability is practice gratitude and joy in a way where you don't catastrophize it, meaning that love hard because you won't have tomorrow. But not going into don't be scared to love because you're worried your kid's going to die in a car.
It's not fear-based. Yeah.
No, but it's the same premise of when you can truly get present to that, there might not be tomorrow. So what have you got to why aren't you loving hard? Why can't you just be all in? What holds us back from really getting to that?
For me, it's so
interesting.
It's it was a life change. Now, what was interesting was I first got interested in thinking about death through another book that was kind of one of my honorable mentions today, and that was a book called Chasing Daylight. And that was a CEO, and it was I remember we were still just kind of chatting, hadn't even gone on our first date yet.
I like why do we all do that?
We were chatting. Hi.
Oh, hi.
One of the things we talked about was the things we read in the things that we really can. And that was the first book that I shared with her was this book, Chasing Daylight. This guy who he knows he is going to die, and he knows the ballpark of when he is going to die. And so how he lives out those final couple of months of his life. And spoiler alert, he dies while writing the book.
Wow.
And his wife finishes the book.
I remember when you gave that to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was just because it was such a profound thought to me. I don't fear death. I don't want to die. I hope to, I do everything. We're big fans of longevity. Exactly. Yeah. So I do all the stuff to make sure that I live a long life, but the notion of I still can't control it.
No.
So live in the moment. That was probably the most powerful takeaway from that book.
Good. I love that. I remember if I go back to comfort crisis for a moment, or this whole discomfort thing. I remember back in 2013 when I started getting serious about my health, and I'll be forever grateful to honorable mention to Kurt Haas, who he was a client of mine, and I trained at his gym, and
all three of us.
That's right. At one point, and I approached him to get some personal training, and I remember the first session on the floor with him, and it was more like assessing sort of my current health level. And I remember, I don't even know if I'm going to survive this assessment because I just hadn't been training much, a bit of running and whatever else. And he looked at me straight in the eye and he said, Eric, if you're going to make progress, I know you will, but in order to make progress, you better get comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think recently we had Scott Aaron on the show, and he had a comment very similar, right? Saying until when you do uncomfortable consistently, then that becomes your new comfort level, right? Yeah. But I think we try to avoid pain, we try to avoid uncertainty. That's why we shy away from grief, and we had some powerful conversations with Don LaChance recently. We call him Grandpa Grief, right? You don't want to miss those episodes. But he talked about how so many of us are trying to numb ourselves and avoid anything uncomfortable. And yet it's in the discomfort that the transformation, the joy, the purpose, the meaning is to be found, right?
That Scott Aaron quote is great. And you're going to love that episode when it comes out next week.
Oh, is that next week?
We're all mixed up.
It's okay. It'll all make sense to you. Just go to the YouTube channel. They're listed in order. I'm going to get it all wrong here today. I'm being prophetic. Next week on the show,
Scott is sure he's going to say something like that when we record it live.
Spoiler alert.
No, that's absolutely good. Lots of other things to talk about from that book. We're going to move on. I want to hear from you, Wendy, as to kind of book or source of inspiration. But certainly, again, we'll keep the links to Comfort Crisis with all of these in the show notes.
Yeah. So again, like all of us, what book do you know? Just because there's so many, I kind of went more. I don't want to say the lighter route, but this one comes up time and time again for me. This was introduced to me by a friend, and it's called 52 Ways to Live a Kick-Ass Life by Andrea Owen. She has a wonderful Instagram page as well, and I read it and I just loved the style of how she wrote it. It's not your traditional book where it's literally like 52 different ways on how to live an amazing life, but her authenticity and just her real life journey with a female lens on different things around divorce, struggles with motherhood, struggles with career, all of that kind of stuff. But the foundation of it is really about real life strategies. So let me kind of backtrack. I think the one myth or not myth, but the one thing that people sometimes gravitate towards when they think about personal development books is that, they're so...
Hey, how does that go?
Wait, let me redo it.
We're going to make sure we zoom in on this is going to get zoomed in and final edits.
Okay, wait, let me do it again. Oh. But it's true because a lot of people think
on the Living Richly podcast.
They don't want to be too because sometimes
it's overwhelming.
It's overwhelming and it can be. Yeah. So it's funny. I have a friend. And she always says, Wendy, I read books, but I like reading books about people getting chopped up and stuffed in freezers. And I won't say her name, but I love you. You know who you are.
We'll put that in the show notes.
And not your make yourself a better person type reading.
Right.
I love that.
And she's one of my best friends. And because when you think about
talk about your friend.
When you think about personal development and you think about self-development, like a lot of it can be overwhelming and just exhausting. And a lot of them can be very deep, which doesn't necessarily resonate with a lot of people.
Right.
I really like how Andrea did her style of this book because she really talks about real life strategies without all of the fluff and the bullshit and 16 pages on one specific strategy. It was very to the point. And it's really about design. It's designed to help you get off the sidelines and actually live your true authentic life.
So I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you if you can highlight maybe.
I was going to put you on the spot
earlier,
that's awesome. But I will after.
Yay!
Eric and I are just going to watch.
We're going to watch that. Steve, can we get some popcorn?
If one of the 52 ways that has stood out to you that you kind of think about? Is there one? I know it's, again, how do you pick from 52? But is there one that stands out for you that comes out of the book?
I think the biggest one, and of course there's so many, and I have read it several times, would probably be around being okay with letting go of friendships that no longer serve you. Yeah, and she so I can't remember exactly how she titled and what number it was.
Rob, it's been nice knowing you.
Yeah.
Steve, you get to stay.
Wow.
Wow.
But it really talks about people pleasing, which I know we've talked about on the show, and the and maybe men struggle with this as well, but the female tendency to want to hold on to things that don't necessarily serve us anymore.
Yeah.
And feeling like we need to have an official breakup party with whatever so I'll say friendship, not relationship, but whatever friendship is no longer serving us, because we're too uncomfortable to, deal with the issue. We are too uncomfortable with, knowing that we've outgrown the friendship maybe from 20 years ago, and maybe we're on different paths. And so the way she described it, and again, it was like a page and a half, but it was just very simple strategic strategies on how to deal with ending a friendship. And I remember she specifically talked about, I think there was 3 different ways, right? It was, you sit down and have the conversation and we're going 2 different ways. The other one is, you gradually slowly start to maybe not go out for dinner as much anymore. Your paths just kind of drift away. But so that would probably be, because I struggled a lot with that, especially as I went through my own transformation, then my divorce, around then my accident, people that were in my life, people that were there to support me, people that maybe weren't, and just friendships change and evolve, especially with the journey that I'm on right now. So
I'm glad that was a good one. The spot. And
thank you for putting me on the spot.
Next time you host, you could put me on the spot. Aaron.
I don't have to wait to host.
He's moving on. He's moving on to dodge a bullet here. But I spoke about that client of mine who I've been working with, and he's really finding his way. Just a few months ago, was really lost. But one of the questions he asked me yesterday, as we were talking, and he came on the call, and you could just say beaming, like he's really finding his way, finding his stride. It's quite fulfilling and satisfying to know that I play a small role in that process. But he talked about the very same thing. He's got this friend, they've been friends for years. The families hang out together, whatever. But because he's growing, he's beginning to see like it's uncomfortable, right? There's discomfort there. And so we had a big, long talk about what that looks like. I said, well, it's too soon to tell. I said, but we had the very real conversation that as you make the commitment to grow, and we're going to grow at different paces than other people. That doesn't mean that we have to part ways or anything, but ultimately there are going to be times where your journey of transformation will lead you out of certain friendships and into potentially some new ones. And sometimes even for a season, you may be in the desert alone for a little while, right? Which is not a comfortable place to be. Go back to discomfort. But I think a lot of people struggle with that.
A lot of people do struggle with it.
I think women struggle a lot. I think, and I'm not saying men don't, but I know, but for women, it's that people-pleasing lens to constantly make everyone else feel okay at our own expense is common.
I will say she does write this from a female lens for the most part, although there are several transferable skills that kind of cross-pollinate into men as well. But I really liked it because it was easy to read. It had great strategies from deep ones around any relationship, all the way to your relationship with your bathroom scale, things like that. And it's a book that I've referred numerous times to my clients, and they love it. Yeah.
Amazing.
I love it.
Eric?
Yep. For me, it has to, like, again, I had the same struggle I think you all did, because there are a number of books that I read last year that were really, really impactful. Yet I think the one that I want to highlight today is by Rainn Wilson, Soul Boom, Why We Need a Spiritual Revolution. And this book, interesting how I came about it. And if you don't know who Rainn Wilson is, it's Dwight from The Office. Okay, it's the actor who played Dwight. And one of the things I like to do is I have a home gym, a quite an elaborate home gym that I built built out during COVID. So that's mostly where I train. And when I'm by myself, sometimes I like to put music on. Other times, more often than not, I'll put on a good podcast. And I know that I'm not sitting there actually watching, it's playing in the background, but I'm still listening, and there's a bunch of stuff that sinks in. And I often I find myself in those 2 minutes of rest between a couple of sets, right? That I'm like zoning in because they've said something really powerful. And a couple of shows I really like, by the way, is the Modern Wisdom podcast with Chris Williamson. We'll put that in the show notes. Another great one is Lewis Howes' The School of Greatness. Really love that one. He's done an amazing job. I think I forget what his English YouTube channel is up to, but just yesterday they crossed over a million subscribers on their Spanish channel. Wow. So he's really making a difference in the world. He's written a couple of great books. But it was while I was working out one day, and I had this playing in the background, and all of a sudden I look up and I go, is that Dwight? There's Dwight sitting across, Rainn Wilson sitting across from Lewis Howes, and go, what's he doing on a show like this? Like I didn't know his personal story. He's been a spiritual guy for a really long time. Really was the most unlikely philosopher to deeply influence, not just refresh my view of spirituality, but also help me even expand my understanding of the living richly sort of model. Yeah. And it's a fascinating book because, of course, it's written in classic Rainn Wilson style. He is funny. You will find yourself laughing out loud several times as you read the book. He's sarcastic. He's funny. He's smart. He's witty. He even spends the opening chapters talking about how in the 1970s, the two shows that shaped sort of philosophy and religion and spirituality more than any other two shows were, one, Star Trek, of which everyone knows I'm a big fan, and the second show with Keith Carradine, Kung Fu.
Yes.
And which is another show that I used to love. So I remember he hooked me right away because it brought me back to my childhood. And there's just for people that struggle with the concept of spirituality, he does practice the Baha'i faith. That's the faith of his upbringing, and he has returned to that now in his later years. But it's not preaching Baha'i. It's not about trying to promote a specific mindset. It's more about understanding that the world needs more than what we have at our disposal. And for him, spirituality is tapping into something greater than ourselves, and does a really great job of unpacking it, making it safe for people to kind of explore what it looks like. But what the central thought that really grabbed me is, after years of spending, I mean, we talked on the show, I mean, grew up in church, and you and I were ministers for years. And I remember after leaving that world, I was like, I'm done giving. And by that, I didn't mean I'd be selfish and self-centered, but forget about giving to causes, or you come to my door knocking looking for money. I'm like, I'm done. I've given more than the average person will ever give in their whole lifetime. Stop bothering me. I'm just trying to build my life and be happy. Okay. And that's kind of where I was on the spirituality front, that I'm done giving. I serve every day. I feel like I serve my clients. I feel like I give back in my relationships and all of that. But beyond that, kind of thought that was it. And he makes a really solid point. He talks about how the world of self-help and personal development has grown tremendously around the world. He says, but there's something fundamentally wrong if all of that growth is only self-serving. If it's only just about me being happier, if it's only just about me being more centered, about me having more Zen, that's wonderful. And he's certainly not against that. He says, but surely there's a bigger calling for all of us to leave the world a better place than we find it, in whatever capacity. That might be smiling at the teller in the checkout line, which I do. I always try to leave people better than I found them, right? But it's making a difference. It's about giving back.
Well, and I've watched it shift you.
Yeah.
Like, I've watched that sort of, it's like your relationship with giving, like, you're always a very giving person, but that sort of, that weird dichotomy that you left church world and now you're like, I'm done giving. I've seen that shift in you. And I don't even know if you remember this, but I remember there was a homeless, but you were picking Sam up, and there was a homeless person, and you walked by and you were like not in your, like, I'm done giving, but you walk by and you're kind of like, okay, I've seen this before, and something shifted in you, and you went and bought a sandwich and gave it to that homeless person. And that was the first time for you that you had given back since the church. I'm not saying it's the first time you've given back, but that you didn't feel some kind of way about it.
Yeah.
It was just a human to human experience.
Yeah, I do remember that
Yeah.
day. I remember walking back into the mall.
You did. You went back
and making a beeline for Tim Hortons and buying a coffee. And I actually asked him first if he was hungry, and he said yes. And I remember sitting back in my Jeep. I actually tell this story in, I think it's episode 3, way back when the podcast started, because that was right during that season. All this stuff was happening. Yeah. And that's actually before I read Rain's book.
Was it before?
It was before. But so that started something. But when Rain's book came along, I think it watered those seeds. Yeah. And now I firmly believe that when we talk about living richly, it's about, in many ways, redeeming your past, not just getting over your past, but redeeming it. Yeah. It's about living fully in the present, and deeply engaging with it, and then also building your future. But all of that is designed so that I can now give back and make a difference.
It's so good. And I know when you recommended, you sent me the note about the book, and I ordered it, I think within 30 seconds you suggested.
Well, usually when you order,
as I do whenever you tell me, and it really did. It gave me permission to explore spirituality again. And Rain, if you are listening,
please come on the show.
Please, we want you on the show. Please,
we love you, man.
Everybody listening, send Rain a note.
Tell them that the Living Richly podcast would be the perfect next guest appearance for him.
I think it would be awesome. Okay, we've got just a few minutes left, but I'd like to kind of do almost a rapid fire round 2. Okay, so we're going to go in the same order. Let's
like a minute each or something.
Like a minute each. Just what is it and why is it important to you? And Kate, you're up.
I'm going to read a few out that I put down instead of doing that. So I'm going to Heal, the movie. It was on Netflix. It's all just around the power of thought to heal the body. Stress can harm the body. This is all about using your brain to physically heal your body. It's absolutely fascinating. I know we've talked about it before on the show.
So good.
Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. We talked about that one. Putting an end to kind of those negative thoughts, right? How can you reposition? Great. It's such a great book. It's actually the last book my stepfather gave to me before he passed. So it even has huge meaning for me. Yeah. And one of the first books he gave me is on here too, Joy of Living. It's by a Buddhist priest, and I won't even try to pronounce it. I won't butcher it. We'll put it in the show notes. And that's the first book I ever read on like the joy of true finding joy and happiness through meditation. A bit of a harder read, but a good, and I do read, by the way. I just don't read as often. I just wanted to state that. And then Celestine Prophecies, the very first book I ever read when I was 16. Yeah. A really easy, simple read on sort of what I would talk about, like living richly, what it looks like now, but it's around 9 insights and it's told in a storytelling way. And it's the first time I ever experienced someone talking about energy field between two people. So at 16, that's the first time I was like, oh, that's interesting, right? So starting to think differently. So that's my rapid fire.
Amazing.
For me, I'm going to stick to just one book. I'll follow the rules.
Well, he is a rule. You don't like breaking rules.
No, that's me.
That's you.
That's right.
Especially your own.
I'm very comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yes.
Nice.
The Art of Everyday Assertiveness.
Great book.
It's such a great book. And
Find your voice.
I've probably recommended that book to more people. Yeah. Most of my clients know that I've at some point brought up that book to them. My kids, I've brought up the book. You and I have talked about it, and just the notion of, and there's a bunch of things that come out of that, but certainly that's where the notion of fog, fear, obligation, guilt, are you doing things for that? The Bill of Rights is another powerful thing. I have the right to be wrong. I have the right to change my mind. There's a whole bunch of them in there.
You have the right to be my friend.
I have the right not to be your friend.
On fire.
I walked
right? Yeah. So, but just such a reminder of having your own voice, owning your voice, and showing up. It really is a book about showing up with authenticity.
Yeah. Authenticity.
Yeah.
There you go.
Great book.
All right, Wendy.
Yeah.
Great book.
I'm going to not follow the rules with Kate. I've got one movie and 2 books. So the movie, kind of an old school movie, 13 going on 30. Yeah. So a bit of a fun movie, a great movie. And that came out, actually, I remember watching it in the theaters 2 days before my oldest daughter was born. She's going to be 20 in May. So Jennifer Garner.
Really?
Yeah,
Holy cow.
Crazy, eh?
Yeah.
This is just really quickly, it's just all about a girl who's 13 and she wishes that she she was 30 and she wishes she was like the pretty, popular, had the perfect career, all perfect friends, all that kind of stuff. And the movie just really ties around to how it's far more important to really focus on being compassionate, true to yourself, true to your values, and to have integrity. So just a wonderful, wonderful feel-good movie.
Love
and
it.
then my books, 2 really quick books, Untamed by Glennon Doyle.
Yeah.
Phenomenal book. I remember when that book came out a couple of years ago, and I think there is something like, I don't know how many thousands and thousands of reviews on Amazon for her book, but just a really great book around, again, authenticity and being true to yourself. And then The Energy Bus with John Gordon. John Gordon is a phenomenal author, very short stories, like short books. So really great. I refer my clients to them a lot, but this is a great one, The Energy Bus. And it's all about 10 rules. It's a story about George, and George is miserable.
Yeah.
You know where I was going to go with this?
What?
No, but this was the very first.
I didn't know. Yeah. And right. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So
Are we going to find out?
Let the rest of
We're not
them in
going to
on
find
this,
out. Are
yeah.
we going to find out the rest?
Sorry,
No.
I guess it's not just our show, eh?
I'm like, hello,
Yeah.
we're over
Oh, I
here.
know,
But
yeah.
when you gave me the book Chasing Daylight, I gave
It's
you
so
The
funny.
Energy Bus.
Oh,
today. Yeah.
Look at that.
yeah.
I didn't know.
Finally connecting
And
the
I didn't
dots.
know
I
that
love
was, you
Yeah,
had that book in
Suspense
there,
was
but
killing
yes.
me.
Well,
But
I
it's
know.
a great book. You can literally get through it in a couple of hours, but
Wow.
it's 10
Oh, that's
rules to fuel your life, work and team with positive energy.
That's awesome.
Great
So
books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So good. I'll do 2 as well. One channel you can follow on Instagram that I think anyone who's trying to fuel their healing journey, follow the holistic
Oh,
psychologist
so good.
on Instagram, Dr.
so
Nicole
good.
LaPera. She's phenomenal. I think she's up to 8-9 million
Something
followers
like
now
that.
on Instagram. She's written some phenomenal books. I've ordered a couple of them. They're on my to-do, my read pile, but I haven't got to them yet. But just her daily, you'll benefit from the content.
So good.
It's so good, so solid, really, really good stuff. And the book that I picked for my second round, one of my favorite authors, I've only read 2 of her books. The most recent one is Cassandra Speaks. The author is Elizabeth Lesser.
I'm almost done that one.
Oh my God, such a great read. That's not the book I'm recommending right now, but I highly recommend that one. The first book I ever read from her is called Broken Open. Read it in 2017. It was actually in February 21st, 2017. I had hit the wall. I was in full out burnout. I was on anxiety medication. I was in probably the worst shape of my life when I read this book, and I lived with this book for over a year. I could only read little bits of it at a time. Oh, fuck. But she talks about the once born and the twice born. And the twice born are those in the fire who discover themselves and find themselves and come out of the pain, come out of that, basically like the phoenix rising from the ashes. And so that I highly recommend. It is a really good book.
Yeah, thank you, Erica. It's
thanks.
powerful, and I love the fact that it impacts you and continues to impact you the way it is today, because
Great book.
that's the kind of books that we're looking for. So listen, we want to hear from you. We want to know, what are some of your favorite books, sources of inspiration, podcasts, all of that. And you can do that. One of the things we want to encourage you to do is to join our Facebook group. We have a private Facebook group. You can do that by, if you just simply go to livingrichley.me, you will find a link that will take you to the group.
Right on the main page.
Right on the main page. And you can ask to join. We'll make sure that we connect you there. There's all kinds of incredible conversation. In fact, I might argue one of my new sources of inspiration is our Facebook group, because of the number of people that share and some of the stories that are shared. So we really want you to be a part of that. Of course, as always, like, share, subscribe, do all of the things. You can do that. The other thing I want to encourage you to do when you go to livingrichley.me is you will find an opportunity there to sign up for a 15-day challenge that we are going to be releasing very soon. And you can sign up so that you are one of the very first people to get that. It's going to be absolutely amazing and a great way to jumpstart any kind of that living your best life growth that you want to do. Thank you again for all of us for being a part of this episode, for being able to share this with us and continue this on this journey. And until we chat next week, get out there and live your best life.